As August 1st, 2025 approached, the world braced for impact. This was President Trump's deadline: sign new trade deals on America's terms or face sweeping tariffs. Markets trembled, leaders scrambled, and the air was thick with uncertainty. Trump's approach was clear. America first, everyone else second. He saw decades of trade agreements as losses, and now he was forcing a global reckoning. The deadline wasn't just about tariffs, it was about rewriting the rules of international commerce. Multinational corporations feared for their supply chains, while governments weighed sovereignty against economic pain. Emergency meetings erupted from Tokyo to Ottawa as leaders tried to predict the fallout. The world was being forced to choose: accept America's terms or risk a trade war. For Trump, this was the ultimate test: transactional, bilateral, and unapologetically aggressive. The stakes were enormous, not just cars and steel, but the very nature of global power and partnership. Would the world defend the old order, or adapt to Trump's new reality? The August deadline became a symbol of a deeper clash between multilateralism and raw economic power. As the clock ticked down, the world wasn't just debating tariffs, it was debating the future of global cooperation. The outcome would shape alliances, economies, and the balance of power for years to come. The world held its breath, waiting to see which vision would prevail. At the core of the 2025 trade crisis was the Trump doctrine: deal or tariff. The message was blunt: renegotiate on America's terms or pay the price. Trump weaponized America's consumer market, discarding slow diplomacy for high-stakes brinkmanship. The goal: create enough chaos that other nations would cave. Trade deficits, to Trump, were proof America was losing. Tariffs were his fix. By making imports expensive, he aimed to force jobs back to the U.S. and rebalance the scales. This strategy sidelined global institutions like the WTO, favoring direct bilateral pressure. Every nation trading with the U.S. had to rethink its approach. Old rules no longer applied. The constant threat of tariffs made planning nearly impossible for businesses worldwide. Uncertainty was the point: make the status quo so painful that even a bad deal looked good. The result? A volatile, unpredictable world where every country was forced to play Trump's game. The global economy became a high-stakes contest with no guarantee of winners. Trump's approach shattered predictability, turning trade into a relentless test of nerves. The world had to adapt or get left behind. As the deadline loomed, the EU and Japan, America's closest allies, found themselves cornered. Trump threatened devastating tariffs on their auto industries, forcing a painful choice. Both chose negotiation over confrontation, signing deals that protected their industries but required tough concessions. The EU agreed to open its markets to American agriculture, a bitter pill for many European leaders. In return, their cars avoided tariffs, but the deal was more survival than victory. Japan faced similar pressure, opening its markets to U.S. farm goods and digital trade rules favoring American tech. Both nations secured exemptions from auto tariffs, but at the cost of long-held protections. These were not triumphs, they were strategic retreats. Trump's doctrine proved brutally effective at forcing risk-averse allies to the table. The threat of economic chaos was too great for export-driven economies to ignore. Reluctant handshakes in Brussels and Tokyo gave Trump the wins he wanted. For the EU and Japan, it was damage control, better a flawed deal than a trade war. The message was clear: in Trump's world, even friends had to pay up. The era of easy alliances was over. Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, chose defiance over compliance. Refusing to yield to Trump's demands, Carney's government accepted the pain of tariffs rather than set a precedent of surrender. The decision was strategic: giving in would only invite more pressure in the future. Canada accelerated efforts to diversify trade, strengthening ties with Europe and the Pacific. The cost was real. Tariffs hit steel, aluminum, and agriculture, causing job losses and political headaches. But Carney framed the struggle as a fight for national principle and economic sovereignty. Support programs cushioned the blow, and Canada retaliated with targeted tariffs of its own. The message: Canada would not be bullied, even by its closest ally. This stand challenged the Trump doctrine, showing that not all allies would fold under pressure. Carney bet that the integrated North American economy meant U.S. businesses would feel the pain too. Canada's gamble was risky, but it was a test of whether principle could outlast power. The world watched as a middle power stood its ground. In a landscape of reluctant handshakes, Canada's refusal was a bold exception. The outcome would shape future resistance to American pressure. The US-China standoff was the heart of Trump's trade war, a clash of superpowers, not partners. As the deadline neared, both sides dug in, refusing to blink. This wasn't just about goods, it was a battle for technological dominance and global influence. The US wielded its consumer market and control over key technologies, restricting China's access to semiconductors and AI. Washington demanded sweeping changes to China's economic model, demands Beijing saw as existential threats. China countered with its dominance in rare earth minerals and the power of its own vast market. Beijing hinted at restricting exports, threatening global tech and defense industries. Both sides believed time was on their side. Trump needed a win. Xi needed to show strength. The deadlock persisted, with neither willing to back down. Talks continued, but real progress stalled. Each side talked past the other. The world watched, knowing the outcome would shape the global economy for decades. This was more than a trade dispute. It was a generational contest for supremacy. The stakes, not just tariffs, but the future of technology, ideology, and leadership. The chessboard was set, and neither side was ready to concede. While leaders negotiated, American families felt the impact at home. Tariffs meant higher prices, on everything from washing machines to groceries. What was meant to protect U.S. industry became a hidden tax on consumers. For many, even small price hikes strained already tight budgets. Businesses struggled too, facing higher costs for imported parts and disrupted supply chains. Some warned that tariffs could force layoffs or even push jobs overseas. Farmers, hit by retaliatory tariffs, felt the squeeze as export markets dried up. The administration tried to soften the blow with subsidies, but frustration grew. The political risk was clear. Would voters accept short-term pain for uncertain long-term gain? The trade war's costs were immediate and visible, while the benefits remained distant. As the 2026 midterms approached, economic anxiety became a political liability. The question, how long would Americans tolerate the fallout of Trump's strategy? The answer would shape the next chapter of U.S. politics and the global economy. The price of protectionism was no longer abstract, it was personal. Trump's trade strategy didn't just disrupt economies, it shook global alliances. Allies like the EU, Japan, and Canada began building new partnerships hedging against American unpredictability. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership gained momentum, excluding the U.S. The EU pursued deals with South America and Asia, seeking stability outside Washington's orbit. Countries explored alternatives to the U.S. dollar, wary of being cut off by American sanctions. The world's reliance on the U.S. financial system was now seen as a vulnerability. America's role as the indispensable nation was at risk. By pushing allies away, the administration risked isolating itself. Competing trading blocs emerged, making the world more complex and less stable. Short-term wins in bilateral deals came at the cost of long-term influence. The global order was shifting. America could no longer dictate the rules alone. The recalibration was pragmatic, not anti-American, but the consequences were profound. The world was learning to get by without U.S. leadership. The era of unquestioned American dominance was fading. As the dust settled, a deeper issue emerged: trust. Trump's transactional approach left allies questioning America's reliability. International commerce depends on predictability and shared understanding. When trust erodes, deals become fragile and economies less efficient. The Trump doctrine's sudden deadlines and surprise tariffs undermined confidence in U.S. commitments. Allies wondered if any agreement would last beyond the next tweet. The result: nations built redundant supply chains and sought new partners as insurance. The global economy became more fragmented, less efficient, and more defensive. The search for resilience replaced the drive for efficiency. This trust deficit risked a decade of slower growth and rising tensions. America's greatest asset, its network of alliances, was built on trust, not just power. Treating that trust as expendable threatened long-term strategic loss. Rebuilding confidence would be far harder than negotiating any trade deal. The lesson: in a globalized world, trust is as valuable as economic might. The 2025 trade showdown changed the global economy forever. Trump's deal or tariff strategy forced concessions, but at a steep cost. Canada's defiance, China's resistance, and shifting alliances signaled the end of US-led globalization. A new era began, one defined by national interests and economic resilience. American consumers paid the price while the world adapted and moved on. Trade wars proved there were no clear winners, only disruption and damage. The US won some battles but risked losing the long-term war for influence. The world wasn't just reacting, it was reshaping itself. The US-China stalemate showed the limits of economic pressure against a determined rival. Canada's stand proved allies wouldn't always trade autonomy for peace. The future was multipolar, with power more diffuse, and America less dominant. In the end, trust, not tariffs, would determine who thrived. Cooperation and reliability became the new currency of global power. The nations that understood this would shape the complex century ahead.